We'd like to invite Datuk Saifuddin,
Okay, sure.
yeah. Datuk Saifuddin, Datuk Mukhlis, Shamsul Astar, and Colin, if you could replace Sheikh Faisal because he's still on his way.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, members of the press, audience, what we're going to start off here is we're going to start off with the press conference for Wupid 2011. Wupid stands for the World Universities Peace Invitational Debate. On the closest one to me here is our organizing chairman, that is Mr. Shamsul Astar Ismail. That will be followed by Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, who is the patron as well as the Deputy Minister for the Ministry of Higher Education. On his right-hand side is Datuk Mukhlis Mahathir, who is the Deputy Minister for MITI, or Ministry of International Trade and Industry. And the last person, which is the youngest person on the panel, has just graduated from University of Cambridge. He is Dr. Kamalan Jivaratnam. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Shamsul Astar Ismail, Organizing Chairman for the World Universities Peace Invitational Debate, to give his remark. Please.
Deputy Minister of International Trade and Industry, Yang Berhormat Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, Deputy Minister of Higher Education and also patron of World University Peace Invitational Debate, members of the media, Dr. Kamalan, Chief Educator for Wupid 2011, and members. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good afternoon. Hotel Pullman as Wupid official hotel. For the team sponsors, Fuzzy Logic and Bank Rakyat, thank you for your support. And by the way, we still have a lot more rooms for more sponsors to come in. We can discuss after this. For KS Entourage, thank you for this wonderful stage. We really hope we can sponsor a stage for the finals in December. For the media members, thank you very much for being here. We hope with your presence and positive comment, Wupid can be the world #1 debating championship. Ever since in inauguration 5 years ago, Wupid has always wanted to evolve itself from a mere peace debating competition into one of the main tools used by the international community to manage complex crises that poses threat to international peace and security. In response to the multi-dimensional peace initiative, Wupid aims and focus is to facilitate the political and policy process through the promotion of dialogue and debating. In order to meet the challenge posed by the scale and complexity of today's peace initiative, Wupid has embarked on a major organizational reform, the appointment of a peace ambassador, aimed at strengthening and warranting the relevance of topics that shall be debated, and the management and conduct of Wupid relationship with leading peace organizations. A key objective of this reform is to guarantee that debates arranged at Wupid, as well as those at monthly Wupid debate series, have accepted the possibility of being persuasive and instrumental to policy making and on-ground peace efforts. Our first direct peace enterprise and upcoming debate publication, which will be developed in close consultation with Orator Foundation, inspired by Datin Nur Juma and other key debate stakeholders, represent the first attempt in over 5 years to transcribe and document the major discussion and debate from the round at Wupid. It is intended to help peace campaigners better understanding and test certain policies, principles and concepts in the peace initiative, as well as their strengths and limitations. This is the last page. I would like to take this chance to express my gratitude to our patron, Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, who has contributed to the development of this reform, which will continue to be reviewed and updated in coming years as peace initiative continue to evolve and a new lesson are learned. Having said so, it's with great esteem and honor for me to invite Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah for his remarks and introduce the Peace Ambassador for the World University Peace Invitational Debate. So,
Salam sejahtera, salam satu Malaysia, salam Aid Mubarak, salam Merdeka Semara. Yang Hormat Datuk Menteri Mahathir, Deputy Minister of BT, but more importantly, we welcome him as a friend of Wupid and a member of Wupid. Saudara Shamsul, Saudara Yunus, Dr. Kamal, brothers and sisters. First and foremost, I would like to thank all, and in particular Dr. Mukesh, for being able to be with us this afternoon. I also recognize the presence of Dr. Najwa, the founding chairman of Yayasan Orita, a yayasan dedicated to finding sponsors, specifically for gila-gila people who love debating and speaking and something to that effect. Alhamdulillah, we are now into the 5th series of Wupid. As mentioned earlier, we started in 2007, and we have learned a lot as we grow from our inaugural year. You know, when Wakil Rakyat in our constituency, when we attend function and the microphone does not work, that is done by purpose by the organizer because they want us to lulus peruntukan. But not pun lah, not pun lah. Okay. We realize, I mean, all of us gathered here, I believe, are passionate about debate. We are firm believers of the importance of having this kind of conversation. And it is important because of many reasons. Number one, it is an intellectual exercise that is of significant value to the development of human capital and human civilization. In the context of the Ministry of Higher Education, starting last year, we began to measure using an instrument called 93S. 93S is a short form for Malaysian Soft Skill. Basically measuring soft skills. There are 7 elements of soft skills, and we found out that one of the 3 major issues that we need to address is critical thinking. Second is communication skill. Third is English proficiency. That makes debate to us more relevant, because debate is a platform for nurturing the 3 soft skills, at least in the formal sense of it. But because this is a World Universities Peace Debate competition, we thought that after 5 years we need to move beyond just organizing debate. So we are embarking on at least a few new initiatives beginning this year. Number one, we are going to start the BM version of Wupid, inshallah in November. So there will be the BM version of Wupid, meaning to say Wupid in Bahasa Melayu. It is not going to be confined to only Malaysian universities, because we will also be inviting universities from the ASEAN region. Should we be having more money, and then we probably can invite more universities around ASEAN. Secondly, I think it is very important that we should try to reach peace issues that are being debated on stage and real peace initiatives that are taking place around the globe. For the last 4 years, we have been debating issues on peace. It is valid, it is relevant, but we could enrich further the debate, not only in terms of the topic, but also in terms of its content, the matter. If we can actually bring the real issues that is happening on the ground on stage for debate purposes. The other thing that we are looking at is we do not want to be another debating platform where we only train debaters. We would also like to see activists, peace activists coming up from this debating competition. I am sure once students start debating on these issues, they learn more about it, they research on it, and hopefully they become not only passionate debaters but also advocates or other activists of this initiative. And that is the reason why, my beloved brothers and sisters, we have Dr. Mukris with us this afternoon. We are not inviting him as a deputy minister, but rather we are inviting him as a peace activist. I'm sure you all know that he is the advisor of the Global Peace Initiative. He is the advisor, and he has been involved in this initiative around the globe for many, many years. And we are of the belief that having him on board will do a lot of great, will help us a lot in enriching the content of the debate and also to, as I said, bridge between what is being the expression on stage and the social action that is happening on the ground. And we hope that people will emulate his work as a peace activist, and that some, if not all, of our debaters will eventually become a peace activists themselves. It is why, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, Wupid is very proud to announce our peace ambassador, Dr. Mukris.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon. Salam sejahtera, salam satu Malaysia. Yang hormat Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah, the Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Saudara Syamsul and Saudara Yunus, both the driving force behind Wupid all this while, and also Wupid 2011, Mr. Kamal, who's going to be the chief judge. I was told he was the chief adjudicator, so it sounds very fierce. And ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for this kind invitation, not only for me to attend this press conference, but also for the of my appointment as the peace ambassador for Wupid. I'm deeply honored and very flattered also by the kind remarks made by Yang Hormat Dr. Saifuddin. I almost didn't recognize myself as you were describing me. In any case, I've always felt compelled to do as much as I can to help Wupid, because I believe very much in what you're doing. That it is very good work that you have been doing all this while. Not only as exactly as Dr. Saifuddin mentioned just now, not only in basically bringing out talent in debate from among our young people, but also in getting them to be able to think laterally, more critically about so many subjects. It is not only limited to just rhetorical discussions where you will see, of course, debaters have oratory skills in their efforts to convince the other side, and also judges and also the audience. But for them to also think very deeply about those subjects, despite the fact that they are given themes of debate, perhaps 10-15 minutes before the start of these debating sessions. Because of that, the inclusion of peace as a major theme, after all, Wupid is the World University Peace Invitational Debate. So I find it very, very telling, very appropriate that the word peace comes right in the middle of Wupid. So it must be a core value of the debates that you conduct. And therefore, what it does is put substance into rhetorical discussions in the form of debates. Whilst, of course, many of the debaters are already very knowledgeable, very well read about major topics of the world. At the same time, they are able not only to grasp the issues, but also to dwell into them very deeply, understanding the different nuances and idiosyncrasies of each of these issues, and then able to articulate and argue their points across. I'd like to see more of that happening, especially in the very important topic of peace. Under the Perdana Global Peace Organization, now it's Perdana Global Peace Foundation, it's PGPF, we have always been advocating the criminalizing of war. So this campaign to criminalize war is something that we've been working on for the past 5 years also. And you would think, well, at least some of you would think that this is the most natural thing to do. That if killing one person is illegal in most parts, if not all parts of the world, killing a whole group of people, as happens normally in a war, should also be illegal. But nevertheless, war still happens. And even as we say that war is evil, there will still be others who say that war is a necessary evil. So, which means that in some cases, to their thinking, war is a necessity. So, which makes our job that much more difficult. We advocate the criminalizing of war under all circumstances, not under some, and allowing it under some other circumstances. So, of course, this will bring about all sorts of issues. Last time I was involved on the program with Yunus, we had the same topic, and I recall that some of the foreign delegates, participants, and debaters were questioning why it is necessary to criminalize war. So, that being the case, it means to me that although to some mind putting peace as a topic of debate
could be very one-sided, because you would think that who would be against peace? But actually, you'll be surprised, as I was, that there will be some people who feel that they could argue for war. So, from our perspective, a very simple definition of peace is the absence of war. Some people would say that, no, in order to get peace, we need war. So, I suppose you too can see the irony in that thinking. But believe me, there are a lot of people who think that way. So, therefore, I feel that if we were to bring peace as a major theme in the debates organized under Wupid, you would still see a very healthy debate going on, arguing both sides. It is, of course, my hope that the advocates of peace will win, but that is not guaranteed, because it still, in the end, depends on how good the oratory skills or the debating skills of the debaters themselves come December. So I like to again take this opportunity to thank from the bottom of my heart the organizers, particularly Wupid, Muhammad and Dr. himself, for this honor in appointing me the Peace Ambassador. I have only the best that I pray for Wupid, and it is my dua that Allah SWT will bless this event and that much good will come from it, since it involves not only Malaysians but also debaters from the best universities across the world. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
My question is, before the debates even begin, do you members of the panel already have a preconceived stand on the matter of debate, which will happen tonight? Is it?
The one right after this?
No. Okay. Well, you will have already have a preconceived stand on the matter being debated, and also will the debates results, whatever they may be, change that stand? And also, like Mr. Shamsul said, that the results actually carry a bit of weight, as in when it comes to instrumental to policy making. My questions is to both Datuk Mukris and also Datuk Saifuddin. Will the outcome of the debate, whatever it may be, carry any weight in terms of when or if the country's government would have to make such a decision, that is to pull the internet plug on social media?
Sure.
That's my question.
Besides the few things that I mentioned in my remarks, we are also starting a new tradition where every month Wupid will organize a debate on a current topic. So this is the Wupid monthly series, starting this afternoon on social media. But please be informed that the debaters that we are going to select on the monthly series are, in a way, at random. 50% of them will be student debaters. The other 50% will represent either debating icons or celebrities related to the motion that is chosen for the day. And it is going to be strictly an academic exercise. The chairman of the debate of the day will do a disclaimer at the beginning of the debate, because you can, for instance, imagine one day Saifuddin Abdullah on one team versus Saifuddin Nasution on the other, and Nasution being the government and Saifuddin being the opposition. On a certain topic. I mean, the whole idea is strictly an intellectual exercise, but we hope by doing that, we could, in one way or the other, enrich the whole discourse on the issues. So in a way, it is not going to have any direct implication on either the debater or the government of the day or the opposition, because we, as you know, government and opposition as far as debate is concerned is not real, but the matter is real, and we hope we learn more about it. We were even thinking of organizing an annual battle of wits on some very humorous topic like which one starts first, the egg or the chicken. But of course, you can imagine the debate is not going to be about eggs and chicken. It's going to be larger than that or wider than that. But it's going to be interesting. The whole idea is to encourage the debating culture. We want to enrich the debating culture. If I may also recognize the presence of Puan Asia Hamzah, Pegawai Pelajaran Daerah Temeluk. With her permission, yes, thank you, Puan Asia. She is here with a 10-person strong team. Simply because as the Pegawai Pelajaran Daerah, her vision is to have debate as one of the niche area of Daerah Temeluk. Of course, the other niche area is basketball. That has nothing to do with you, it's a coincidence. And choral speaking for primary school. So this is one district looking at certain niche area, but debate is one of the area that we are looking at. Okay? Sorry, I debated.
Shamsul Asfar, Dr. Mukriz and Kamaran, may be seated at the front row, ready for the exhibition debate. Gentleman right there in the Kung Fu outfit, that would be Mr. Prabha Ganesan. He is a columnist for the Malaysian Insider, champion debater. That's what he wanted me to say. Accompanying him is Ms. Lavanya Jivabala, a university student debater from University Malaya. On the closing government, we have Daniel Mohan Jacob, a university student debater from University Putra Malaysia. And his partner would be Faisal Mohiddin, managing partner for Mohiddin and Max. On the opposition side, or the opening opposition, we have Sheikh Faisal Al-Ayubi, University in Malaysia, which is ranked in the top 30 world ranking. Accompanying him is Wan Muhammad Firdaus, the founding director for IDS. And the closing opposition, now this is a pair, father and son team. The father, the father, Mr. Omar Salimuddin Abdullah, emeritus member for the World Universities Debating Council, and his son, Rafiq Saladin, a university student debater for University for UITM. Alright, so as promised by Dr. Saguddin, I got some disclaimers to make. Alright, so I'd like to remind everyone watching, as well as the viewers at home, that this debate series is...
Given the gravity of the situation, here's the proposal. We would like to have a mandate. We believe we're making it unlawful, whereby people cannot use or access social networking sites. If they do, then they're breaking the law and they can be prosecuted as well. But we're also suspending it. For instance, the same way China suspended and blocked IP servers for Facebook, for porn sites, for Google. We think that this falls under their paradigm. Sit down. what I'll do for you in this speech is I'll talk to you about the value of social emergencies in times of social media in times of emergencies, and secondly, how our move does not monopolize the dissemination of information. While Prabha, who's still at his prime yet, will be talking about the lines drawn in terms of trading civil liberties during this situation. Firstly, what do we constitute or what do we qualify as social media? We consider web-based, whereby people have access to spread information, access where information can go viral. We'll also look in terms of networking sites, and those, for instance, right now we have Facebook and Twitter. These are not political think tanks, ladies and gentlemen. These are not news agencies, other blogging sites where you have one person held accountable to this circumstance. We also look at how it's a dangerous time in terms of unrest, whereby misinformation, misrepresentation of the situation can lead to a climate of fear, a climate of chaos, a climate of violence, and even looting, ladies and gentlemen. So at these times, we're taking out the channel, we're taking out and clogging the artery that fuels the situation. Before I move on to my substance, anyone?
Ma'am, the beauty of the internet and its vast information is very much simple. There's a variety of things or information that you can choose from. The bad or the misinterpreted ones always read it out on its own.
No, particularly within the situation of Facebook and Twitter, ladies and gentlemen. This sort of misinformation that you have is viral. This sort of information is accessed by everyone, everywhere. If we can clock this problem, ladies and gentlemen, then we clock at least 90% of the problem. We can never settle problems of people rooting and trying to get routers and so on. But ladies and gentlemen, the principle still stands. In a situation like this, what do? We say we take out the problem and we clock the major artery. Sit down. But nations like Japan, South Korea, America, and UK have had to deal with such situations. Right? The question that side opposition has to answer is this. How do you respond to unrest, and where do you draw the lines to liberties awarded to these people? Because if you want to maintain that fact, and if you want that sort of consistency, then you're lying. Because at times of emergencies, and at times where states, or at times where you have to declare emergencies, ladies and gentlemen, for instance, curfews, advocates also have to accept and recognize the necessity and the safety of the people within this circumstance. This proposal is just like that. This proposal is an extension of what do you then do in a state of emergency. But let's look at my substantive, right? Sit down. The value of social media during emergencies, right? Because what does social media really do, and what do they achieve during emergencies? Nothing crucial really, right? Because in times of unrest, they're not crucial in providing services, they're not crucial in providing social security, they're not crucial in providing medical care. Those amenities are not compromised regardless of whether or not there's an unrest. Social media, ladies and gentlemen, only falls under the paradigm as to three things. Firstly, they're only an outlet of expression. Right? The vast majority of Facebook users are just laymen who don't even know what's going on to begin with. Right? They just jump on the bandwagon because it's a hot issue. I saw something on the streets, I'm just going to report it. I'm just going to link myself to this kind of situation. That's the kind of vast majority that you have of people here. Secondly, these are unverified information, right? They're just mentioned, they're just emotions, they're just things that people want to express within that particular circumstance. There's no accountability to the things that they say, there's no legal culpability as well, because it's so viral. Who do you then apprehend with this situation? They can be misinformed, they can incite violence, they can incite a climate of fear, ladies and gentlemen. And this is something that's really crucial, especially in a time of social unrest, when social order breaks down, and when the state in that situation, ladies and gentlemen, is placed at a dire situation, right? For instance, in the London riots, 7,500 members in the Facebook group were called to join in the looters. That's the sort of situation that you have, and that's the sort of situation that you don't want to have, because how then do you find legal culpability? How then is it verified information that these people are talking about? But thirdly, what sort of ethics standards do these people adhere to in terms of reporting, right? Because journalists, ladies and gentlemen, are trained to write. They're trained to investigate. They're trained to talk also about facts, ladies and gentlemen. For instance, newspapers. These are credible sources of information. Someone to hold accountable to. For instance, the editors, for instance, the journalists, within a particular circumstance when you misinform people. But how do you misinform people on Facebook or Twitter who just talk about the things that they want to talk about, right? Sit down. The social media, ladies and gentlemen, they have no place in a time like this. They should be temporarily halted. But also, secondly, right, how our move does not monopolize the not being held culpable, ladies and gentlemen, can be applicable in this case. We concede that it's true we're blocking off certain amount of information, ladies and gentlemen. But above all, we're clogging the artery that causes this sort of problems, and the artery that causes this climate of fear. We don't want it to go viral, especially in a situation like this. Thank you.
boils down to one very simple idea, right? What stand should the government or state take with regards to social media in times of emergency? Do they shut it down or do they keep it up? Now, from side opening opposition, our stance is clear. We have two things we want to tell you, right? It's not in the best interest of the state and its people, and people have the right to know what is going on, especially during times of emergency. This is something that side opening government has failed to understand. Side opening opposition is going to prove one very simple idea, right? Why the state and government should not do this and should never do this in the future or now. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, one argument in my speech, and I promise you I will talk to you about why the right of information is even more important during times of emergency, which the opening government failed to understand. But before we go on to that argumentation, right, I have 3 points of rebuttal or 3 major issues with their case. Firstly, is with regards to the idea is that, look, right now, the type of emergencies they're talking about are, for example, racial riots or socially driven riots or natural disasters. Now, the funny thing about these 2 examples is that isn't the first question that pops into a man's head or anyone's head is that isn't this the best time for you to use social media to deal with the situation, or at least let people know not to go to this street because you might get thrown with a Molotov cocktail. This is a type of media or this is a type of information people get off the net with regards to with regards to Facebook and Twitter. Because what they fail to understand is that the internet, and when you talk about Facebook, Twitter, and other social medias, it's easily accessible, and people access it on an everyday basis, maybe once, twice a day. That's why you have all people Facebook addicts to begin with, right? If that's the current context we're talking about, that means these are the people, or a society per se, have this access and eventually go to these websites and find out information. But then they have a second issue, right, which is the second rebuttal I'll be dealing with. It's not real or correct information. It mobilizes rioters. Now this is really funny, right? It's not real or correct and as they claim it to be. Let's just assume it's not. Let's just assume it's slander, it's lies. Even if that's the case, I asked her earlier, right, when information is dispersed onto the net, vast amount of information is put on the net. It may be true, it may not be true. The people tend to gravitate towards information that's true. And information that's slander or lies or may not be true are information that will weed itself out because people are less likely to believe it. Because when you talk about social media, we're not just talking about Facebook groups like I want to have a ride in London. You have Facebook groups like Utusan, for example, Star, or One Malaysia, which the Malaysian government runs. Are you telling me that social websites come up and give out false information? I don't think so. These are the types of information that can be true that people would tend and want to gravitate to. Lastly, lastly, Mr. Speaker, the idea of, look, in times of emergency, we need to take up this opportunity to, get rid of people's liberties during the time of emergency, right? I mean, China does it, why not us? Now, this is where we are different, right? In Malaysia, especially in the context as they set in, right, Western liberal democracies, first and foremost, Western liberal democracies stand steadfast with the principles of I give you your rights, you are free to do whatever you want. If that's the kind of context you live in, is this something that people in Western liberal democracies can accept? Secondly, is this not going against their own principles of no censorship? Because what makes Britain or other Western liberal democracies any different from China then? Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, right? Before I go to my argument, yes, ma'am.
So tell us how by shutting down a platform or means of communication, you are actually depriving the people of their liberties.
See, this is where they don't understand the context of the internet nowadays. I'm not going to call someone and I'm not going to just keep on texting someone or calling someone. The idea of the internet is that it's so easily accessible that people can access it all around the world. People, for example, since they wanted to, push out the issues in the Middle East, let's just give some examples from there, right? People on the ground in the northern part of Africa, 6% of their population in Egypt tweeted and Facebook about the events and what was happening on reality on that ground. People around the globe in Malaysia found out through that means. This is the type of information that comes off from this kind of social media. But with regards to whether or not are we really curtailing their rights, yes, we are. Because especially when you come in the state, the current present time, the internet is so important to you. You check your mails on your BlackBerry, you check your mails on your iPhone, you check the dates, the calendar, you know, the weather, for God's sakes, even Google Maps. I got lost coming here, by the way. I needed to use a Google Maps, right? So the internet is that fast. So we don't think, Mr. Speaker, or ladies and gentlemen, disbanding or taking away social media at times of emergency is something good. And I'll tell you why in my argument right now, right? I want to tell you right of information is even more important during times of emergency. Now, why is this important? When you have a group of people, let's just say you're going to the street and there is a riot going on. First and foremost, with people already knowing that the internet is easily accessible, information is posted up there every minute, every second. Right? With this kind of context and understanding that people have, the one thing a person would be able to, go to the one thing the person would be able to do is not attend that riot or avoid that particular problem at that point in time. You see, Mr. Speaker, when you look at individuals on the ground, people need to know, and the government shouldn't keep out any avenue of information being dispersed to them. Especially when you're talking about governments that are probably busy dealing with the problem at that point in time, people on the ground who are experiencing these problems on the ground itself can update and tell individuals what's going on in reality. What roads to avoid if there is a riot, what roads not to take if there is a flood, which state not to enter if Katrina is coming again. This kind of issues are issues that happens on the ground that people can find out and post on the internet. That's how important it is, ladies and gentlemen, and this is why we feel from side opening opposition, we've told you two things. It's not good for the people, it's not good for the state. At the end of the day, side opening opposition stands with one very simple idea. We don't want any form of censorship. We don't believe in that. We think that people have the right to know, especially in times of emergency, because at one point in time, it might cost them their lives.
Thank you very much.
I was thinking about Habib. I was thinking how he was going to use this opportunity to get recruited. He had two deputy ministers here, a really swell time to make an impression. I guess he dropped that ball. But the good part about it is he still has time. And I would like the deputy ministers and other people not to misjudge him. He has seen better days, not many, but he has seen better days. I like the whole approach, and I'm going to use a line I use all the time. This is the reason why we don't get children to write national policies. Because they tend to argue on selective issues, and they like to then stick to those things as a basis to win the day. Now, Lavanya over here asked this question. In a situation like this, when we are pressed, it's a unique situation. It's not a situation like in the present or today. What do? All he said was, we are not going to reduce any excess. We're not going to change anything. We're going to stay the way we're going to stay. The question then is this. In all these developing nations and developed nations, when there's a situation like this, it is consistent to have curfews. It's consistent to reduce civil liberties. It's consistent to have food rations. Even if you have money, you can't buy it because we've got to save all this. All this what these are commonly held excesses are shut down during this period. And he's okay with that. He has no argument against that. Then why are we wrong to make another extension into the internet? How is it that we're inconsistent to the things we already do in these instances? And he has no answer to that. You know why he has no answer to that? He's never thought of it his whole life. And hopefully after this debate, he'd think about it and he asks himself, oh yeah, we're supposed to have a position too. We need to help people. Because there's a classic example he said. You need to know where the Molotov cocktails are. It'd be nice to know that some guy named Jimbob75 told you on his Twitter account that there are people with Molotov cocktails on the left. So don't go down the street that direction. What if you walk way down the right and meet the crowd and meet the mob still? And if you die? The question I have to ask Habib over here is, are you willing to pay the price? And he says this, yeah, but we can decide on what is reliable information and not reliable information. In a time when there are fires breaking out just outside your door, when there's a threat to your family, the question remains, are you capable of making decisions? Are you capable of making research into Jim Bob 75? Who is Jim Bob 75? What's his wife? Is Jim Bob a man or a woman? Can we trust Jim Bob or not in those times? That is why I agree. We need to allow information to spread and disseminate as it should today, presently. I mean, I hear a lot of stuff that Habib writes in his Facebook account. I sometimes read it, I sometimes ignore it, I sometimes tell other people to ignore it too. But the question is, I have the benefit of time. Now, the question that I have to ask the opposition bench is, in these unique situations, when we are pressed for time, when we are pressed to make decisions that are working, how do you make that determination when there's so much of information coming left, right, and center? When the people who themselves are writing it are in panic, are in stress situation, are in tension. How do you make the determination in such a pressed time? And the answer must come from the opposition. It's not good enough for them to just say, we believe in information. We believe in freedom. If that's what you do, then that's a very good reason why you are not in government and we are. Yes, sir.
That's the whole point, Prabha, about your Western liberal democracies. You are at liberty to choose.
Yeah. I like that. That's the kind of point that doesn't really go anywhere, but it sounded nice. You have the choice. We say there's a price to that choice. And we believe, considering the situation in which we're operating in, that's a price that's too high to be paid by your society. Again, what Lavani already talked about, there is no monopoly of information. If you believe some of the media, maybe the Malaysian Insider or somebody else, that things like the New Straits Times or the Yusosan or some other person are not as reliable. We're not shutting out CNN. We're not shutting out Malaysia Kini. We're not shutting out even Free Malaysia Today, God forbid. So, you can still choose between these people that you may or may not trust. We are just saying we're not going to allow other agents who may not be able to be verifying, agents that do not have credibility, agents who are just jumping into the situation simply because they like the idea of writing something or they themselves are in a height of panic. Now, that's not a very difficult thing to do, is it? In this debate. We're not going back to Operasi Lalak 87, where we shut down everything, the star shut down, and no one had information any other way. We live in the present. And in the present, there is no monopoly. That's what Lavani talked about. Now, just because it's clever doesn't make it something you should respond to. It makes it particularly important for you to respond to Habib. And if you have a question, I'll take it now.
The same Etusan, Star, and One Malaysia groups are on Facebook. They disperse information that's true. How do you deal with that?
But hold on. First, if you shut down Facebook and Twitter, then they're not doing so in those pages. However, their websites are still up. nft.com.my is still up. utosan.com.my will be still up. And everyone, the MalaysianInsider.com will be also up. And so you can be reading the news anyway. So the question here is the education of information, and there's no monopoly of information. I believe the opposition are thinking in this debate today. I also believe they're going to rely on the same simple arguments that we need to have the right to know. The right to know, in a general debate, and the right to know in these special circumstances are two different things. If you can't make the distinction, then you're struggling in this debate. And the final thing he said is this. He said, well, we can decide, but the question is, it can go viral. The reason why we shut down this microblogging and shut down the Facebook is, it goes viral. Somebody may say something really, really inaccurate, but because of the provocative nature of that information, then it will be spreading wild. Like for example, they say, I felt some Burmese are breaking into my neighbor's home. The next thing you know, it just goes viral because it's so sexy to hear. Burmese breaking into your neighbor's home. And these are the situations that we have to deal with all the time. So, Mr. Speaker, what are we deciding this debate? Are we deciding, as I want to talk about in my material already, that civil liberties have to be drawn. The lines have to be drawn somewhere. Now, we are willing to take a position that in these unique circumstances, in these unique situations, we draw the line here. We're willing to do that. Where have they drawn the line? They're not willing to draw the line. They're just saying, we'll just let the information flow as it does. But that's inconsistent with all modern governments, all modern democracies, the democracies that they aspire to, who do shut down some of these civil liberties in these circumstances. So are they saying those governments are wrong? Those governments are flawed? Because if they are, then they are really defending nothing here. And they say, you know, this typical great debate line is, to defend everything is to defend nothing. And that's what they're pretty much doing. They're trying to have the cake and eat it too. We're trying to govern. We beg to propose.
Malaysia Kini boy on the government side and a government guy on the opposition side, speaking on whether or not we should suspend social media during emergency. First of all, I think we need to make it clear that what the opposition is trying to say here, that at the end of the day, in the very liberal democracy which the government is talking about, we feel that it is in the best interest of not only the people, of not only the state, but even the news agencies itself, that we need not suspend social media, and we need to maintain the existence of social media, because social media is the best way for information to reach the very people in which those information needs to reach. And secondly, we also believe in the opposition that the freedom of information is also more crucial during emergency, and it is through social media that people will be able to get the best information that they need during this time of emergency. Now, before I go on to my point, which is why we believe social media is part of the fourth estate, which is the media which the government is trying to talk about as well. Now, Prabha feels that liberty has a price to pay. I mean, during time of emergency, for us to have liberty, there is a price to pay. And at the same time, the government, through the first speaker and the second speaker, felt that during time of emergency, despite the fact that they suspended Twitter and Facebook, people can still reach information through the websites of this newspaper. Now, let me... denied, sir. Now, let me just remind us, remind the floor, that the news agencies themselves in today's world uses Facebook and Twitter to reach the readers, because they know that social media, which is Facebook and Twitter, has two huge advantages which no printed media, through newspapers, printed newspapers, or even websites can reach. Social media is both mobile, which is very important during times of the emergency, and number two, social media are instant. Now, because of these two, because of these two huge advantage of social media, that is why even during times of emergency, in Tunisia, in Algeria, in Egypt, in other countries in the Middle East, social media plays a huge role, not only to the people, but to the news agencies themselves, because they know that is the best and fastest way for information to reach their readers. Now, I would like to talk about, I would like to talk about the one point which the first speaker was talking about, clogging major arteries of information, hence stopping the looters and writers from spreading information. Actually, one thing about social media, which I think the government has conveniently ignored, is the fact that on Twitter and Facebook, you can choose who to follow and what to follow. Now, because you can choose who to follow and what to follow, you can also choose what kind of information are you getting. So this whole idea of, Molotov on the right and Molotov on the left, choose what kind of information that they want to get through the social media, especially if it comes from these news agencies. Yes.
So, do you not agree with me that the basic tenet of representative democracy would fail if you don't allow government prerogative to protect the masses in, as Prabha mentioned, unique times?
Now, ladies and gentlemen, the government is just one part of the so-called democracy that we're talking about. What about the people, the right of the people, to have the individual liberty to know what is going on in the country? And I think in the liberal democracy country that you are talking about, that is the very principle of liberal democracy. The right of information is very important. No problem, sorry. Now, the government also spoke about how news editors are more credible and information are verified and people can have time to think. But ladies and gentlemen, in times of panic, the most important thing in times of emergency and in times of panic is people need to know what's going on every single time. Now that is an emergency, ladies and gentlemen. When people don't take time, okay, maybe we'll watch the Malaysia Kini tonight, maybe at 10 o'clock they'll come up with the latest information on what's going on. People want to know what's going on at every single time. Now yes, before I go on to my point.
On the idea of liberty, right? If you can allow certain things to be shut down, things like curfews, things like food ration, why then would you allow things that are viral and untrue information to be online on these websites when you have available news sites still on?
Okay, two answers to that. First of all, we should not suspend this so-called social media, despite the fact that we are rationing food and all that. It's because information can save life more than food itself. Because in times of emergency, it is very important for everyone to know what's going on very quickly, mobile and instant. Now secondly, at the end of the day, what you do when you suspend social media during times of emergency is that you do not allow people to have the right kind of preparation to know what should they do next, in the next 1 hour, in the next 2 hours. And this is where social media is so important, because it is through social media everyone communicates, and it is also through social media everyone gets to know the right information through which they choose to follow. And I think people, you are conveniently ignoring the fact that in social media, on Twitter and Facebook, you can choose to follow who you want to follow. Ignore. Now I'm going to go very quickly on why we believe that social media is a new fourth estate, as well as part of the news agency, as part of the media agency. Now ladies and gentlemen, if you look at the world today, people like Barack Obama or even CIA knows about what's going on in Tunisia through Twitter. Now these are the kind of changes that we are looking at the world today, because even news agencies knows that it's only through Twitter, it is through Facebook that they are reaching millions of readers which are following them through the social media. Now if we were to suspend social media during times of emergency, what you are doing is that not only are you stopping some people from spreading lies, but you are also stopping the ability of the news agencies, of the government, and every single other people who are using social media to spread crucial information to citizens of the country, and also crucial information which the citizens of the country need for them to carry on their life safely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of this house. Now, it was interesting to hear that information is actually more important than food in times of crisis. Had I known that fact earlier, I wouldn't have gained all this excess weight. But let's deal with the idea. It is presumptuous for the opening half of the opposition to come up here and tell you that whatever information that you get on social media is necessarily correct. We don't doubt the judgment of the population at large to decide what is the information that is useful for them, what is not. But usefulness and correctness are two separate things. That is the distinction that they fail to recognize in this house. Now, even assuming for a moment that through social media these people get, or rather us, we get the right information as to where the Molotov cocktail was, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to disarm it? We can't do nothing about it, because these are unique circumstances, and that is what the opening half of the government has told you, that we need to give a heart attack, according to Lavanya, to these circumstances, so it doesn't spread further, so it dies a natural death. Now, from the closing half of the government, we will tell you this. While they have told you what needs to be done, we will tell you where the government gets the right to do this. And that is our contribution to the debate. And that is where we bring this debate to the next level, to the more analytical level, which was missing from the opening half. But before I do that, let's listen to what the Sun has to say.
In the time of chaos of the London riots, how else would we Malaysians have known that one of our students was being beaten up in London without YouTube being used at that point.
Yeah, and we fly the medivac to London, right? Evacuated him from London, brought him back to Malaysia, nursed him back to health, and sent him back there. No, we didn't do any such thing. We couldn't, because we were not at the situation there, and we were not in a position to help. So even if we get this information, what can we do other than to say these Londoners are useless? Bunch of crap. I mean, I shouldn't say crap, but you know, that's what that came out, so that's what it is. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the analysis from the closing half of it. They have told you from the opening half that the government needs to do this because it needs to give a heart attack to the riots and to hopefully solve the problem. Now, we're not going to tell you, the entire government bench, I hope, that it will necessarily solve the problem. But what does it do? It buys you a lead time. It buys you a lead time so that you can better manage your forces, so that you can better manage your resources to actually quell the problem. That is what was missing during the London riot. I don't know, Rafiq, which channel you were watching. Because the police didn't get enough lead time to mobilize that additional 16,000 force to be on the streets of London to quell the riot. Now, no amount of information on Twitter or Facebook could help the police do that. But, in fact, it could dissuade the police from getting enough forces on the street because it would actually mobilize the mob mentality among the rioters. So that's the only thing that the information on social media did. But I'm here to tell you right now, ladies and gentlemen, that the government as a representative democracy, or rather as a representative democratic government, has the right to do that. In fact, it is imperative for the government to do it, otherwise the government would lose its legitimacy. Simply because decision-making process over the years has become complex. We have moved from direct democracy to a representative democracy. In this regard, we have given the franchise to decide on matters involving the state and security, security of people and property to the government. In return, we pay the government tax, and we hope it is being used well. Since the two deputy ministers are here, I thought I would just mention that. Now, the government that fails to protect its people is deprived of the legitimacy under the representative democratic system. Because there is no point for me to appoint or elect a government into office, but then having been asked to make the difficult choices. At the same time, there is no point for a government which has been elected to go back and run to the people each time for a referendum or for decision-making process. The government can't go to the people in a time of crisis and say, look, should I now suspend Twitter and Facebook, or should I not? Because the people, as you can see today, 8 of us here on this stage can't agree to anything. And that is why we give the franchise to the government. Now, it is not about getting rid of liberty, as they would like you to believe. This debate has got nothing to do with suppression of liberty. This debate is about managing the biggest liberty of all, which is the liberty to life. And that is very crucial, because we fail to recognize, especially they fail to recognize, not us, that if the government screw up and fail to protect the people in time, the biggest liberty is lost. When you are dead, you can't tweet. Yes, I mean.
The government derives its mandate from its people. If people don't agree to the shutting down of social media, the government violates that mandate.
Sure. Then the people can vote that government out in 5 years' time. Unless and until that time comes, the people need to allow government certain prerogative to make tough choices and tough decisions on their behalf. The idea, as proposed by the first half of the government, is not so much as to curtail the internet. The idea is to manage outflow of information so that it becomes or leads to a manageable result for the government in times of crisis. They also tend to forget the last part of the motion, which says emergencies. What have they told you about managing emergencies? They didn't tell you anything other than to say, we are smart. We know what information to take and we know how to process them and what byproduct that comes out of that process. But ladies and gentlemen, that's not true. Because at the end of the day, the closing half of the government believe that it is the prerogative of the government to suspend social media in times of emergency, because otherwise it would be or it would lead to a failure of representative democratic system. Now, this is important. I don't want a government which fails to protect my interests, my life, my liberty, and my property in times of crisis. Purely because some people from that side of the house thought it is fanciful to be able to tweet while running away from a mob which is trying to kill you. That doesn't make sense. And the entire case actually doesn't make sense. Thank you very much.
We hope that the Temerloh people could have been on the government, ladies and gentlemen. I think they could have done a much better job. Because firstly, I'm going to look at, in my speech today, I'm going to go on to two extensions from closing opposition. Firstly, how this proposal creates an avenue for governments to abuse the democratic right that is the internet. Secondly, how this disempowers people on the ground within these critical areas of emergencies. Before I move on, I'm going to deal with two rebuttals, two arguments that came out from Open Government. They said they had more arguments, but they actually didn't. Prabhas was just a rehash of Lava's second point, right? Firstly, this idea, yeah, cool, isn't it? Firstly, this how the nature of social media during emergencies is used as to mobilize looters and riot groups. Secondly, how there's no accountability to social media users. We can't trust these people like Johnny Bob 75, for example. So firstly, on the nature of social media during emergencies. We think, ladies and gentlemen, that even in times of during emergencies, we agree that there could be people who might try and mobilize looting groups or riot groups, ladies and gentlemen. But we think that it's also important that these kind of individuals are then checked and counterbalanced by people who call or who Facebook their parents telling them that they're all right, ladies and gentlemen. Or that people calling out for aid on other people or calling for evacuation from these kind of areas, ladies and gentlemen. Or people posting videos of these riot groups, ladies and gentlemen, in areas where our average conventional media corporations can't access because of the because of the danger of those zones, ladies and gentlemen. People, for example, who took the video of the Malaysian student being beaten up during the London riots and posting up on YouTube, allowing us Malaysians to understand the gravity of that situation and to perhaps mobilize for help. We don't think that just because Max said, oh, we couldn't help him, so that means that it would have been legitimate for us to not have known that he was being beaten up, is a good enough reason for us to cancel the right to social media. Secondly, on the accountability of social media users, right? Now this is completely ridiculous coming from Prabha, because I only know he's making this argument because every time he goes on Facebook and he messages women who have, cats and bunny rabbits as their Facebook profile photos, and they turn out to be not very attractive, he gets very upset, ladies and gentlemen. We think, we have three responses to this, right? Firstly, we think that is your liberty, ladies and gentlemen. That's the power of the internet, Prabha. You can say whatever you want, and you don't even have to be accountable to it, ladies and gentlemen. That is that is the power of anonymity. But secondly, we think that people are smart enough, right? There are other ways to differentiate which information you should trust and which you shouldn't. If 500 people say don't go to the left, but only 2 people say don't go to the right, ladies and gentlemen, I think you're pretty smart to understand that the majority would have probably taken the right turning. Secondly, we think that individuals would have trusted sources, right? If you have your best friend saying don't go to the left, and you're a person you don't really like saying go to the right, ladies and gentlemen, we think you know who to trust. That's the power of the internet. There's a wide market of ideas, there's a wide market of opinions and facts, ladies and gentlemen, and you have the ability, and we think that ability to differentiate what is right and what is wrong is the exact liberty that we want you to protect. We don't care if people are duped. We don't care if some people get the right information and some not. But the ability for you to access that information, your own right to differentiate what is right and what is wrong, or to even have access to that kind of information, is what we want to protect. I'll deal with max extension in my own extension before I move on. Yes, perhaps.
And you believe in these dire circumstances, you'll be able to make the same distinction of valid and verifiable information as you would in times of peace?
Yes, I think you do. Because I think that even though in these situations things are chaotic, people are experiencing turmoil, we think that there's still this rational thought within your mind, I have to get the right information or I'll die, ladies and gentlemen. We think that's quite instinctive. So you make the effort to try and get the rational, or to make the rational choice as to which facts you want to trust, or which areas you want to avoid, or which areas have the riots, or which areas have the floods, ladies and gentlemen. Within you, in those situations, although perhaps irrational, the human instinct to survive would always empower you to make the right choice. So firstly, let me talk about how this creates an avenue for governmental abuse, right? We understand, ladies and gentlemen, that the internet is perhaps the most democratic and individually empowering invention of mankind after the condom, right? Refuge for some individuals, like Prabha, ladies and gentlemen, to voice opinions and transfer information away from the shackles of the state and the society. The ability to shut down something so democratic as the internet. We think that, especially during a time of an emergent Patriot Act, for example, and they said, oh, we'll only use it on suspected terrorists or suspected acts of terrorism. And then a sudden report comes out that the National Security Agency tapped into the emails and the phone calls of millions of Americans, ladies and gentlemen. We think that's worrying because the government uses this tool whenever it feels appropriate to, ladies and gentlemen. It doesn't need to confide within its people. It doesn't need to tell its people, this is an emergency, this is not an emergency. Whenever the government feels that it's an emergency, they can use it. And we think that's dangerous for the very democratic idea that the internet and the social media possesses. Secondly, we think that doing this during a time of an emergency disempowers people on the ground, right? We think that during these times of chaos and destruction and panic, like the 9/11 attacks or Hurricane Katrina or the Japan tsunami or the London riots, ladies and gentlemen, it is a norm that the nation and its whole communication system or goes into turmoil, right? Because usually within these times, these kind of areas are then shut away from regular journalists or regular news reporters. Can't access these areas because it's so dangerous, because it's radioactive, for example.
A very good afternoon, honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen. With all the host university pride on the line, I start off by saying this. What we could not understand from side closing government was how the opposition side failed to grasp the idea that in the case of the London riots, Facebook, Twitter and social media, other forms, were to blame and were a part of the instigation that resulted in the riot in the first place. This is where we feel it kind of bewildering that, they said that it's fast, it's effective, it warns people, superbly. It also recruits the people in the riot. Now, there's something about riots, ladies and gentlemen, that I have to explain to you. Riots, when it comes to riots, bigger is always better. And how does it become big? Because of Facebook, because of Twitter, because people can reach out to the masses and tell them almost instantly, let's meet up at this certain street and throw Molotov cocktails in the opposite direction. This is where we believe that, because people are naturally afraid of getting arrested during riots. When the crowd is bigger, there's a lot less likely chance that you will be arrested, making people much more, susceptible into joining the riots, not taking during the first minute. You told me that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we believe that today's entire debate came down to two different contentions. One is the idea of social media becoming an information tool during times of emergencies, as well as the idea of democracy, government, civil liberties, that whole messed up thing. But first on the idea of information, this is where we believe, I already mentioned earlier that, we believe it's not entirely practical to rely emergency services and whatsoever on these social networking sites or this social media, because as all members of the government bench have already mentioned, while out there you're out on the social media having to filter through what Jimmy Boy 75 had for breakfast, who won like yesterday's football match, and all the other clutter that is there on Facebook and Twitter, is that where you want to put, where you want to rely your vital information, which as they claim may save your life? During these times of, during these times of emergencies where, these social medias suddenly have a surge of news that, pours out into them. And in that time, those people over there want to give it to panicked people who are in fear to make the right decision of what to do during that time, based on what Jimmy Boy 75 said, quote Prabha. But then, nevertheless, that's where we believe it's entirely wrong, because during the London riots, although some people were saying, let's throw Molotov, do not go there because of Molotov cocktails, some people were also saying, let's come meet here to throw Molotov cocktails. If the social media site was shut down, there wouldn't be Molotov cocktails thrown there in the first place. Not because people would not have shown that at all, but because much fewer people would have showed up there, making it much more easier for authorities to take the certain measures, required to shut it down. As what my Mac already said, that the authorities, when it's much smaller, they have the time and the adequate manpower and force to deal with the problem. This is where the idea that, having to say, hang on, that social media having it for information so people can rescue themselves is counterproductive because social media causes the problem in the first place. Yes, Abhi?
Sir, would you shut down the usage of telephone calls, text messages, emails, and everything that people can use to communicate with anyone else?
No, I would not. Because because telephones and whatsoever is a one-way line. You between that person. If you do want to call 100 people to show up, it will take you much longer than what Facebook will do. Facebook has given instigators of violence a much more effective and faster way of grouping up people to commit violence, something that authorities and police forces dread. Now, before moving on to the second, last POI.
Doesn't it also give government an equally rapid opportunity to monitor exactly the same kind of information?
No, it does not, because being the government itself, monitoring is entirely difficult. One, because they cannot employ enough manpower to monitor every single person on the internet. People who instigate these crimes often use, pseudonyms or short forms that, get past the filters that Facebook and Twitter that are already implemented. Like during the times of riot, anyone who posts riot will be flagged. Instead, they don't write R-I-O-T, they write R-I**T. They get away with it easily. Because of this, it has always been difficult for government to crack down, relying on the social media whatsoever. Now, the idea of democracy and our liberties in it, we fail to understand how a short-term suspension of Facebook and Twitter can be such a problem to your liberty and rights as what opposition side is saying. This is where we believe that, our government side already argued that we are okay with implementing curfews. We are okay with food rations. We are okay, with you doing all sorts of other things during times of emergency to ensure the security of people. How then is suddenly Facebook and Twitter such a major problem? The only thing they said is because it helps people escape from trouble. I explained to you that it does not necessarily do it, and if it does do so, it is not entirely reliable. Now, being into that, what I believe is the turning point in closing side government is that the government's responsibility lies during times of emergency to protect the stakeholders. Now, the stakeholders are not all the people in the UK who are now criticizing David Cameron for implementing this law, suggesting this law. The stakeholders are the victims in those particular areas that were affected by the riots. The victims who, those 5 people who died, who are the 16 people who were injured, doesn't then their rights, their liberty to life, as mentioned by Matt, override all those other people who think that Facebook and Twitter is more important? Doesn't a democratic government deserve that right of empowerment to protect the stakeholders, which are not all people at that moment of time, but are the people in peril? Those are the people which, deserve, the utmost care of the government because their fundamental right has been tarnished. This is where every government in the world has to acknowledge that to call itself a government, it has to govern people in order to coexist. Certain rights, have to be taken away in order for the government to fulfill its duty in maintaining right number 1. That is the right to life. Facebook and Twitter has become it's a luxury. It's something we can live without, and should not at any cost be put as the ultimate hope and the ultimate hope of being safe in a riot. Because there are other measures, emergency broadcast services and whatsoever. That should be the main thing during times of riot. That's my case. Thank you.
Shame.
Honored guest, speaker, ladies and gentlemen, this House would suspend social media during emergencies. Before I begin my speech, I'd like to say it's a real pleasure to be asked to speak among such a gathering of the country's preeminent debaters. Eminent, that is, on this side of the House. One is less enamoured of those people on this side that have been ranged against us, the sweepings of the gutter press, the purveyors of lies, falsehood and misinformation, representatives of a legal profession fallen on hard times, and somebody who really wishes he'd gone to UN. or even UITM. Mr. Speaker, a parliament is supposed to be filled with honourable members, and we are taught that there is even honour to be found amongst thieves. But what honour is there in a state representative body that seeks to steal your rights and your freedoms? None, we say, because none can be found. Let's have a quick look at the case. I'm basically going to take I'm not going to focus on points, because basically there was only one on that side of the house. So I'm just going to have a look at the whole kind of rice porridge that started up here and almost finished down there, but didn't really quite. Lavanya asked, how do you respond to social emergencies? Okay, let's debate about that. How do you respond to hurricanes? Apparently by closing down Facebook and Twitter. Why? Because there might be misinformation. Can you hear the music from Jaws playing in the background? We say you do not do this by reducing the access of your citizens to mechanisms of communication. They have only one real problem. No. They have only, you wouldn't take any of mine, I'm not going to take any of yours. They have only one real problem with this. The possibility that there might indeed be misinformation and that this information might go viral. Go viral, go viral. No. Our own opening tackled this somewhat insipid line of argumentation by arguing that there are no occasions on which or in which a government in one of their Western liberal democracies, that you realise that a Western liberal democracy is a fallacy, it's an oxymoronic phrase in any case. Many of them aren't even in the West, Australia for example. These people should intervene. We say some information will always be fallacious, particularly in circumstances where everyone is free to communicate it. As my own colleague, extraordinarily handsome young man, has said, still single ladies, as he has said, look, that's what happens. There is a volume of information generated that people can then assess and evaluate for themselves. So what? Somebody says, there's a mushroom cloud over Fukushima generator number 4. A farmer tweets that his sheep have turned a nice shade of pink. Where is the information here? You are at liberty to choose between these two statements. Prabha added only one thing to this. He says it could go viral. Wait a minute. Lavanya had already said that. Hang on a minute. He also seemed to think that governments will need the extra time. No, Prabha, that's why we elect people like this, so that they can make smart people, well-informed people, also handsome people. All handsome people. And having assured myself of the Best Speaker Prize, let me move on. I would also say that these people are there to design policies which will protect us. I want a government that can make decisions instantaneously.
Here, here.
I want a government that can make the right decisions. In fact, I want them, not you, Mac.
That's my cue? Yeah, we have the porridge on this side, but we can hear you slurping. But Omar, the point is this. Don't you think that the democratic government would fail in its duty if it fails to protect the masses during the time of emergency?
No, I don't. I absolutely do not, Mac. You know, and if you listen to the first 2 minutes of my speech, you'd better to work that out for yourself. Because he, during that opening speech, telegraphed his own closing government's extension by saying during Habib's speech, hang on, what's the problem with taking away people's civil liberties? As Rafik said, and we have a big problem with that. That's why they are liberal democracies, Mac. This is not rocket science. Now I begin to understand why he's a lawyer and not a scientist. Because from the closing government, we had this revelation. Usefulness and correctness are two different things. Shock, horror, amazement.
On failed perception.
Sit. Usefulness and correctness are two different things. No, I've already told you. If you shut these Facebook mechanisms down, it gives the government more time to get the situation under control, Mac says. Well, what if they can't, Mac? What if they can't get the situation under control? What if they need the collective effort of the people to do something about the problem? Because governments can use Facebook, Twitter, blogs and YouTube as well as any individual. One Malaysia, nobody said that, one Malaysia, I said it twice, I like, click on the icon. So I bet that everyone sitting there, the gentleman, the Dato is probably emailing or twittering right at this very minute. These people here all have access to that. They've all got Facebook accounts. You know, no, not you. Them, Prabha. That's why they're in government, Prabha. And you're in the gutter press. Their contact with their followers can be instantaneous. Okay. I like or I don't like is reflective of choice. Your partner added nothing to that. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very happy to have been involved in the first Wupid debate. I think closing opposition, in fact the opposition bench, wins this debate.
Right, thank you very much, debaters. You may cross the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, there won't be any results. This is absolutely an exhibition debate. You can follow, we have the medias here, Mock TV is here, Sina TV is here as well. You can go online and check the videos out. You can continue